Congratulations. If you're watching this video, it's because you've decided to watch the bonus material video on why does the quadratic formula work. I can guarantee you it is satisfying, but it is also a little bit involved because it involves some algebraic fractions along the way. But it does really give you a good sense of how the formula has come to be, and I reckon it helps you remember to use it. So just a reminder, this is what the general form of a quadratic equation looks like. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. And if that is the case, then we can say that the solution for the quadratic function, or quadratic equation, sorry, is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's a complicated formula, and it feels like it just, it's magical the way it works. But it's not magic. It's actually algebra. It's completing the square. Have a look at the top slide there, the top right slide, number 2. And we're going to apply the completing the square method, but instead of using numbers, we're going to use A, B, and C instead, and we're going to stick with those rather than specific numbers, but we're going to use exactly the same method. And if you remember, when we have a coefficient of x squared other than 1, we take out that coefficient and then complete the square with that. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take out A, and that leaves me with what? Sorry, I'll start that again. That leaves me with x squared plus, well, what's the bx term? Well, if I do the reverse thing, what would I have to multiply a by in order to get b? Well, I'll need a b to start with, but then I'll need to divide by b so that when I multiply by a, they cancel out. That gets me back to my b here. I told you it's algebraic fractiony stuff. So I've got a b on a here, and then an x, and then plus c equals 0. Okay, so I've now got rid of the coefficient of a. Well, I'll put it to one side anyway. The next thing I'm going to do is complete the square inside the square brackets. So that's x plus. Now, remember what we have to do? We have to halve b on a. So we've got, I'll just do it off to the side, then I'll erase it. We've got b on a divided by 2 or multiplied by a half. That's how we halve it. And that's equal to b over 2a. I won't erase it. I'll just put it in the little thought bubbly thing. So I've got x plus b on 2a all squared. And as we should know by now, we then straight away subtract it. The same thing, b on 2a all squared plus c is equal to 0. Whew, complex, but nevertheless, it's there. It's done. That bit's done. Just noting that you might start to see some similarities here with the quadratic formula, just starting to come out a little bit. Okay, moving on. We're now going to expand. Oh, you know what? I might actually do a little bit of work on the inside first because it probably will be helpful. So I'll leave the x plus b on 2a first. And then if I expand the square there, that'd be b squared over 4a squared, like so. Plus the c is equal to 0. And now I'll bring in the a. So that's a outside of x plus b on 2a all squared. And then if I multiply a by this term here, I've got an a here and I've got an a squared here. So the a and the a squared is going to cancel out a bit. I'm going to lose one of those a's. It's going to be left with b squared on 4a plus c is equal to 0. All right, what shall we do next? Let's find a common factor. So we've got minus b squared plus c. And I'm now going to, sorry, I just said common factor, I meant a common denominator. So I'm going to leave that first bit as is. And then I'm going to go minus, and I'm going to have b squared up the top here. Now, because I've got a minus here, when I find a common factor, I'm going to have to make this sign negative as well, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So what will be the common factor? Well, I've got c by itself here, common denominator, and I've got a 4a here. And so I'm going to have to make that one c times 4a, or 4ac, all over 4a, like so, is equal to 0. So there's our b squared minus 4ac, which is underneath the square root sign here. So we're getting somewhere. This is looking good. Okay, moving on. We are actually nearly there. Going off to slide 3 now. I'm going to add that big old fraction to the other side. So I'm left with a outside of x plus b on 2a all squared is equal to b squared minus 4ac all over 4a. And I don't know if you remember from our last 2 videos back, if I've got this outside the bracket, I'm going to have to divide before I square root. So I'm going to divide both sides by a. That leaves me with x plus b on 2a on the left, and on the right, I've got b squared minus 4ac all over. Now, if I'm dividing both sides by a, that's the same as multiplying by 1 on a, which means I've got a times a, which equals a squared. So I'm left with 4a squared. So that's what I've done, multiplied both sides by 1 on a. Whew, nearly there, believe it or not. When I square root both sides, I'm left with, so I'm going to do a square root now, I'm left with x plus b on 2a on the left. And on the right, when I square root it, I'm going to square root the top, and that gives me b squared minus 4ac underneath the square root sign. And have a look at the bottom there, the square root of 4a squared. Well, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of a squared is a. So I've got 2a. And just like we've done with other completing the squares, when I'm square rooting with variables, I'm left with a plus or a minus. Now I'm going to subtract b on 2a from both sides to leave myself with x. And what am I left with? Negative b on 2a plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, also over 2a. So we've got a common denominator of 2a, which means we can combine both of those fractions into one, and I'll do that on slide 4. I'll have x is equal to negative b plus or minus, I'll need to bring that up into the fraction, b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And that is the quadratic formula. That's how it's worked out. So the quadratic formula is really just a completing the square method, where all the completing the square stuff is done for you to leave you with a formula instead of a whole bunch of steps. Complex, I know, but I think it's worth persevering, looking at this video, maybe rewinding it and pausing it so that you can get a handle on it, because I think it's a good exercise, a good mental exercise.